Okay, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We pay respect to the Palawa Pakana people as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of Lutruwita, Tasmania, the land on which we live and meet today. We pay our deep respects to the Aboriginal community and the continued care of beautiful wild Lutruwita. So I'd just like to start to tell you a little bit about Landcare Tasmania. So Landcare Tassie is the peak body for community land care and is an established and trusted not-for-profit organisation in Tassie with a large and growing network. So we've got 324 member groups, 150 individual members, including 95 farmer-based members, and this represents 6,500 volunteers, which I think is pretty amazing. And these numbers are actually growing, so it's a pretty exciting time. So we work across a number of themes within Landcare, and these include advocacy, member services, grant delivery, partnerships, landscape scale projects, and water watch, revegetation, nurseries, and seed collection, which is why we're here today. So this meeting is part of a seed resilience project. So the goal of this project is to set up community seed banks across the state and create a network of people who are involved and skilled in the collection, storage and distribution of native seed to meet the demand of re-veg projects in Tassie. So the reason for doing this is that we really need to look to the future. We need to have a good supply of seed for future re-veg projects within Tassie, and these are projected to increase. So we just want to make sure that we're collecting enough seed and we have enough expertise going into the future. We also might need a supply of seed for natural disasters such as fire, flood, drought and climate change. And we want to build the capacity in the community to become skilled seed collectors. We also want to assist local nurseries to grow local provenance plants for the local area. So this program's objectives and outcomes are to identify the trends, issues and opportunities in the seed collection of native seed in Tassie. We want to establish some kind of communication framework for all of us interested parties to communicate and self-organise the distribution of seed to meet the demand of Tasmanian nurseries and re-veg projects. And we want to identify organisations to deliver training and ensure that seed collection in the community, seed collectors in the community are adequately trained. So this is a list of perhaps who might be involved. This might grow, this list, but yeah, we would love to learn from the First Nations community and from the current commercial seed collectors in Tassie. There's plenty of community seed collectors and of course the Botanical Garden Seed Bank. I've talked to a few arborists about collecting, bulk eucalypt seed when they're doing work. There's council NRM bodies, just enthusiasts out there, and commercial and community nurseries, other land care groups and private landholders. So Landcare has already done quite a few seed collection and propagating workshops, and they're just hugely popular. They sell out. I think the last one sold out within a day. So yeah, we've partnered with the Understory Network, Island Seed, NRM South, Brighton Council, Huon Valley Council and MTWAC up north, and also the Huonville Volunteer Nursery that just started up the other day. So that's pretty exciting. So yeah, looking forward, we want to keep holding seed collection and propagating workshops. We've actually got a survey that we'll share the link with you in the chat. So we're going to do some research around the questions in that survey. And so we'll put together a report from that survey and see what the issues are and collect kind of solutions to those issues. And And then probably the main thing is to create a communication framework for seed collection. So we started a Facebook group, which we will also send you the link, because I would have used that many times in the past few years, just putting the word out, has anyone got any of this seed, or I've just found a patch of a certain plant that's full of seeds. Does anyone want any seed? Things like that. So that's pretty exciting. And then we'll work to help and support groups set up pilot seed banks, which the Understory Network is probably the model community nursery at the moment. They're getting quite organised with their seed bank. So Ruth will tell us about that. So I'll just introduce you to Ruth Mollison. Ruth caught the seed collecting bug while she was coordinating the Understory Network, which is a Tasmanian community nursery, which there's now 3 of them that I know of, Nipaluna and now Huonville Nursery. So she's also started a small business called Island Seeds, and she runs our workshops with Landcare to teach people how to collect seed and propagate plants. So Ruth now volunteers for the Understory Network and Seed Bank. So I'll hand over to Ruth. We've got 4 other panellists here as well, so Ruth will introduce them as we go along. They're basically going to address these general questions, but we're pretty excited also to hear about what's happening on the mainland, and so yeah, they'll be talking to the mainland context. Anyway, I'll hand over to Ruth now.
Thanks, Anna.
That's all right.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for tuning in and working out how to get your Zoom up and running. We appreciate that we've got so many people here today. This is the start of a conversation that we hope to continue. It's really good if we can just make those connections starting today. As Anna said, I have a small business called Island Seeds, and I've been running it for about 10 years now. And I finally realised that while seed collecting is really a labour of love and doesn't pay very much, but I do like doing it. And so now I mostly collect seed for the Understory Network Seed Bank, which is located at the Understory Network Nursery at Tolosa Park in Glenorchy. And recently, the Understory Network has received a Tasmania Community Fund grant for 2 years to run the Home Growers Scheme. This is where people receive everything they need, including instructions and seeds to grow native plants in their backyards for themselves and also for a project or for our nursery. And so through this grant, we've contracted Kirrilly Kent, and I hope Kiri's listening in today because I know she's also trying to work as well. But Kirrilly manages our seed bank and runs the grower scheme for us. So under Kiri's management, our seed bank has increased hugely with a wide range of species. And as we grow in membership, we hope to increase our seed diversity from around the state. We collect seed really for tube stock propagation, so it's in terms of grams rather than kilos. Some of our seeds will last a long time, for example, acacias and eucalypts, but some of them has a short shelf life and they would need to be collected fresh every year, like Brassiaria and Clematis. So we hope that when our grant runs out, that we have enough volunteer seed collectors and an income stream to pay for a coordinator so we can continue to stock our seed bank with a wide variety of species. To me, community seed banks and a network of volunteers across the state makes sense because wild seed collecting is costly in terms of travel and time. And it's a lot more efficient to have a seed bank coordinator driving across the state to train a group of people in seed collecting than that person chasing down seeds from different areas with a risk that they arrive and all of the seeds been eaten by a wallaby or it's not quite right. If somebody is local and on the spot, they can keep an eye on their local patch for a particular species, learn to, when it's ripe, then collect it and clean it and mail it to the seed bank. So I think in the future, there's going to be an increased demand, and that's probably now really, for carbon offsets with larger revegetation projects requiring direct seeding rather than tube stock planting. And to service direct seeding requirements, we need to scale up quite a lot in terms of collecting effort, cleaning equipment and collecting gear. And way back, I attended a seed collectors course. It was run by Flora Bank at Horsham in Victoria. It was a great course. It was very rigorous. It was science-based and practical, and it was underpinned by a model code of practice for community-based seed collectors. Now, Flora Bank now has online modules that are really useful, but I think they really need to be supplemented with hands-on practical components to motivate and connect people with their local environment. And I think we need to work more closely with NRN groups, government agencies, and large private landholders that are planning big re-veg projects, so that we can collect seed for the projects with local provenance and in sufficient quantities. Planners need to realise that there is an 18-month lead-up time between collecting seeds and propagating plants. We could also look at establishing seed production areas for some species, especially those where there's a genetic bottleneck or they're very dispersed in the wild, and James might talk about that a bit more later. I think seed production areas need to be done properly with genetically identified mother plants as well, to increase genetic diversity for some species. And it could be really good for direct seeding to consider seed production areas as well for certain core species to get quantities. Community seed banks and seed collecting can play an important role in increasing Tasmania's seed resilience. And I think with the threats of climate change, we need them now more than ever. Okay, so thank you. Now I'm going to introduce the next speaker, and that's James Wood. James is the coordinator of the Tasmanian Seed Conservation Centre, which is located at the Royal Tasmanian Botanical Gardens. And he's been working in and around seed banking for nearly 20 years. He took on his current job in December 2005 after working at our Q's Seed Conservation Department for 7 years. James has got an in-depth knowledge of Tasmania's flora in terms of plant identification, seed collecting and seed germination requirements. I'm going to hand over to James now. Thanks.
Unmute myself. There we go. All right, and then I want to fire that up. Let's do that. Oops, don't do that. That's a bad mistake. Wait a second, folks. There we go. Share. That's the one. There we go. Right, folks. Oops, let's go back. So, as Ruth said, I'm James Wood. I'm the manager of the Seed Bank program here at the Botanic Gardens. I've been in position since 2005, and I've been managing the Seed Bank program. So the Tasmanian Seed Conservation Centre it's essentially a plant conservation project, but rather than focusing on storing live plants, we're storing seeds. This is just a matter of convenience. You can hold a lot of seeds viable for long periods of time in a very small space for a very low cost. If you try and manage large collections of living material, it's quite costly and very labour intensive. So
Jack,
what we're doing.
Sorry, mate, we can't see your presentation. I'm not sure if you've shared it correctly.
Oh, okie dokie, what's gone wrong? So what
Yep.
Has that worked?
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry about that, folks.
Yep. Goodbye.
All right. So essentially, we're going out in the field. We're trying to target large, healthy populations because we're trying to capture genetically diverse collections. One of the problems with conservation, as you probably know, is a lot of work's done when species are in massive decline. You've got a very narrow genetic base, and that makes all future work much more problematic. One of the strategies for seed banks is to basically try and capture the diversity now, so if a population collapses, that genetic diversity will be restored back into our population. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be preemptively getting stuff in and holding in long-term storage, so that if a problem occurs, we can actually put that back in and keep those populations adaptable. So we're going in the field, we're making collections, we're then bringing them back into the seed bank and cleaning them up. It's all done pretty much manually. We've got a little aspirating machine that does it, but it's given when you're working wild plant species, there's a lot of diversity there. You can't really automate it, so it's all done by hand. And we're trying to get rid of the chaff and debris, but also trying to get rid of empty seeds as well, so we get the collection as clean as possible. But there's always a practical limit to that. Once we've got the collections clean and dried down, they'll then go into 4 laminates. They'll be dried down, put into airtight containers, and then we place them into our freezer. We now have a freezer room running. That's a relatively new addition to the seed bank. And then once the collections are stored, we might know the quality of the collection, how much seed fill we've got, but what we don't know is whether those collections are alive. And so the next step is actually conducting germination tests. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. So where's the seed bank program now? So we are 19 years into the program, and of just literally the last day, we've got about 2,000 odd collections held currently, representing 1,140 odd species of plants. Estimated 54.6 million viable seeds in the collection. The collections are actually bigger than that because we can never get rid of all the duff seed. During that process, we collect about 4,000 odd herbarium specimens, because although I'm not a bad botanist, you always need an expert to verify that you've collected the right thing. And in addition, on top of that, we've collected a whole lot of field observations as well, related species, and all of that data gets entered onto the Natural Values Atlas. In terms of the conservation impacts of the Botanic Gardens, the seed banks pretty much changed the reach of what we can do. Prior to the seed bank being here, the garden's threatened plant collections was basically 138 individuals representing 20 taxa, some potted plants in the nursery. As of September, we're now looking at 578 collections representing 260 odd taxa, 13.9 million viable seeds. And potentially each of those seeds is a unique individual. So, in terms of what we're able to achieve in terms of conservation purposes, this is much more useful numbers to be working with. As we're not holding static collections in the nursery for indefinite periods of time, that's allowed the nursery to free up resources to look at seed production. There are certain species that are really difficult to collect in the wild because they're either very remote or they're producing seeds sporadically over very long periods of time. So sometimes we just get cuttings in, grow them on, and generate seeds here. So one of the things we mentioned is with the collections, we do viability testing, germination testing. The whole point of our seed bank is you need to be able to turn your seeds back into plants. And if you've done, anybody who's done any with wild species will know that for some things that's very easy, and for some things it's pretty hard. I have about 10 volunteers who come in about 4 days a week conducting germination tests, and they put in a huge amount of time and effort. We're running all our germination tests on petri dishes of agar predominantly. As of this moment, we've tested 1,400 odd collections. We've conducted nearly 10,000 germination tests since 2006. When we first started, we only had 2 incubators. We now have 12 different incubators running a variety of different temperature regimes and photo periods. Most of them are running at 10 hours of light, 14 hours of dark, but we do have one incubator which is running at 14 hours of light as a sort of summer treatment. There's a lot of trial and error with this. We do know a bit about seed dormancy and germination behavior, and we know that it's a real big can of worms. This is an analysis I did a couple of years ago for a conference, and this is looking at the germination success levels I've had with collections in the seed bank here. So this is the top 10 largest families in Tasmania, and this probably maybe resonates with folks. So things like daisies and grasses and legumes are pretty easy to germinate. We're getting fairly high levels of collections passing a germination test, but things like sedges and the heathers are much more problematic to get successful germination. So you can see here that I've conducted over 1,480 germination tests on the Ericaceae, and less than about 15% of those tests have actually been successful in getting, greater than 75% germination. That's my threshold level for germination success, which is maybe a little stringent, but that's what we try to aim for. And so this is something that we, as a seed bank, we can't function without germination testing, but this data is, I think, fundamentally important for any restoration and revegetation program. You want to be able to efficiently and successfully produce plants when it's needed. Ideas like priming seeds for broadcast, so that when you broadcast a mixture of seeds, they all start to germinate at the same time. These are things that our research can lend to. And to make that data, this is a big job. And so we've started making our germination data available since about 2008. So if you go onto the Garden's website, there's a germination database on there, and you can look at the tests we've been conducting. So I don't update it regularly. I probably do it about once a year, but you can have a look at what we've done. And sharing this data is invaluable. At the moment, I'm in collaboration with the Australian Seed Bank Partnership, and we're looking at trying to pool all of the network's data into a single portal. So they're creating the Australian Virtual Seed Bank, and germination data will be accessible through that. We're still about trying to get that into shape, but hopefully long term that'll be a really useful resource. And with that, I'll close my presentation for what I do. So how do I stop the share?
Thanks, Jane.
Stop share.
Yeah,
there we go.
that was good. Nice photos there. I like the last one of all the Waratah seed.
Yeah.
Dan, are you here? Can you wave? There you are. I can see you. Hi, Dan. I'll just introduce you first of all. Thanks for joining us. Dan is working with Seed in Victoria, and he's been working there for about 15 years. He says he's still learning, which I think we all are, but actually he's got really extensive experience in large revegetation projects, direct seeding and carbon offset plantings. And Seed in Victoria, I think, is a really good example of what we could aim for in the future. So, Dan, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what you do.
G'day, everyone. Yeah, I can. So Seed in Victoria is a small network of seed banks in Western Victoria. Currently, we've got 3 seed banks and 2 larger ones, being a Ballarat Region Seed Bank and the Murray Mallee Seed Bank. And we supply seed for about 90% of Western Victoria. So a pretty large area. Currently have a full-time equivalent at the moment of 0.8, so 4 days a week for 2 staff members. So hugely underfunded and under-resourced, but anyway, we do what we can. At the moment, we've got a little bit of luck with some funding that's come our way, and it's to try and help out with some projects that we would struggle with otherwise. But a big project in Victoria, the Bush Bank program, which is huge in what it's trying to deliver. And I mean, it could be a bit of a cop-out to say that it was a whole heap of large numbers that was suggested by the government, and then the private sector was left to scramble to try and see if we could manage it. And anyway, we'll see how we go. So that program is 20,000 hectares of revegetation in the next 5 years, supposedly. Probably will take a bit longer, but for all extensive purposes, it's a vast project. So it's going to be a big undertaking. We have been sending out somewhere between, say, 300 and 500 kilos of seed a year. Largely, the bulk of that amount goes into direct seeding, but most of our orders are for nurseries. That is expected to increase to around about 3 to 4 tonne a year, so it's pretty big. I guess the way our seed bank is ran, though, it will help. We have a collector base that supply us. We hold their seed, and we have a public database where anyone can buy the seed on that database. The collectors are paid once the seed's sold. So the seed bank basically doesn't own any of the risk for that seed. And particularly, Ruth, when you mentioned the seed that does have a very short shelf life, we certainly wouldn't want to be buying in any of that. But yeah, hopefully the acacias and such last indefinitely in the cool storage. But we're looking at increasing that program so that we have more collectors, and they're supplying us more to help facilitate this program, the Bush Bank program, hopefully. And so I guess it probably sounds the same as what's going on in Tassie. I'm not sure of the scale over there. Nor am I really sure of the scale in other states around Australia, but I just know what we've been doing. Generally speaking, running around chasing our tail to try and provide for programs that are popping up at the last minute and slightly underfunded, so that they only just get off the ground, and there's no follow-up. So that's usually what happens. I just wanted to I can just touch on those questions that were sent around, and are we having trouble sourcing seed? Yes, we do. We do have trouble sourcing seed from year to year, and there's gluts. Obviously, that's what the purpose of the seed bank is, to hold that glut and utilize it over the coming years when those species are required. But more and more so, we're seeing some species have shortfalls more regularly. So the quantity element of that question is definitely important, and it can compromise a project when you're down on a few species, and certainly makes you question where you will get the seed from and how far you could draw it to put it into a project. So it's definitely an issue. What we've been trying to do to help alleviate that problem is to set up some seed orchards, and obviously they take many years to come online for most species. Some are fairly quick to come up, but more and more so, it's going to be the way that we need to gain our seed. Reduces the pressure on the remnants. It reduces the travel costs and the time involved to get to sites and checking species if you've got them multiple species in one site, and makes collection much easier, especially when you can take a large percentage of the seed that's available rather than abiding by Flora Bank guidelines. So I guess that's one suggestion I would make to the Understory Network, is to get onto the seed orchards, and the sooner the better, really. So I don't know. Hopefully I've helped to introduce what Seed Bank does over here, and we work with government agencies, with private industry. Basically, we have a public database where anyone can buy seed. We get requests occasionally from Ethiopia or Kenya, which I don't really go into, but yeah, anyone could buy that seed.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on.
Is that unmuted?
It's unmuted, yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry?
Dan. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Can you hear me? You can? Yeah. Okay. That was interesting. That was on a much bigger scale than we're doing here in Tassie, and perhaps we're facing slightly different problems, but I think it's good to know what you're doing over there. Sally and Herbert, you're here. I might just quickly introduce you and get you to have a bit of a chat now, if that's all right. Sally and Herbert run Habitat Nursery at Liffey, and they've been growing native plants for revegetation since the 1980s, so a lot of experience. They're seen as gold standard by many. Their nursery, very good quality. They collect 80% of their seed, and so we'd just like to get your views on a couple of these questions and how you see the future of seed collecting in Tassie, if we could. Hold on, you have to unmute Herbert, if you can. Wait a minute, can you unmute?
Is that, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good. I think
okay. Hello to everyone. Yeah, so introduction, you know where we're at. We've been growing seedlings mostly for revegetation projects. We grow between 70 and 150,000 seedlings every year, and we do most of our own seed collection, and the remaining seed we buy from either our, I still call it forestry seed nursery, or wild seed. Not for a while. Not so much these days. Wild seed don't seem to supply as much as they used to. Our own collection is mostly done on private properties. Farmers in the region here give us access to collect, so it's all wild collected, no seed orchards. To address the questions, so seed collecting to get the right provenance, the right quantity, and the right mix of species is a constant battle, big job, largely driven by passion. The returns are not there. It's really a big undertaking. So I've actually been talking about Tasmanian Seed Bank for probably the last 10 years. Every NRM and possibly Landcare officer has at some stage had to put up with me carrying on about this, saying we need something. So the second question I'll skip, but the third question, what's required in the future? I think to add to what's already been said, I think one thing is that I really would encourage Landcare to cooperate with the NRM groups, and also I think TFGA are administering some of the federal funding for re-veg projects. In fact, some really big re-veg projects that we have been supplying seedlings to up here in the north. So, you know, the agencies that are administering the government funding, I feel really need to get their heads together and cooperate rather than compete in that space, to work for the better of the industry, the re-veg industry in Tassie. That would also hopefully mean pooling resources and applying for the funding that's required to run a professional seed bank. So if I'm reading what's been happening already. I think that's, and what Ruth has been saying, the sort of efficiencies gained by engaging the community is absolutely spot on. That's invaluable, I would say. But at the same time, I think from where I look at it, I think it's important to have that professional. What does Dan say? They got 0.8 of a full-time equivalent. I think Tassie should aim for that immediately. 0.8 or one full-time equivalent, a professional person that's getting paid to be there for the long haul, to actually coordinate and professionally run a seed bank, because what I could see is potentially a downfall of just relying on volunteers and community work, or relying on it too much, is that the quality it might not be there. To just rely on volunteers to keep that going, I think is potentially an issue. So I would strongly recommend that you go down that road, really work together with the NRM groups and with the other agencies. Even Greening Australia might be worthwhile talking to still. I don't know what they're up to now, but to really work cooperatively, to pool your resources to set up a professional seed bank. One more thing, maybe I said seed bank, and then on your website you talk about seed banks. So that raises a question for Dan. Maybe you mentioned 3 seed banks. Is it are they 3 well organized and cool room seed banks, or are they run by volunteers? I could envisage for Tassie 1 seed bank is sufficient. 1 well planned and organized seed bank should be sufficient to supply the whole state. I think that's it for me.
Yeah, good points, Herbert. Thanks, Dan. Did you hear those questions at all from Herbert? Would you like to turn off your mute and respond to those?
Yeah. So our seed bank is about 7 by 7 metre cool room. We're in a shed, got a hot house for drying seed, and a few bits of gear that go with it. So, but the 3 seed banks are all housed in that cool room.
Okay.
Yeah, they weren't always, and they should. One of them should be up in the Mallee, but temporarily it's in our cool room at the moment. But it's the database that runs it's the database that does the seed bank, the justice. It coordinates everything. It's live, so when I create an invoice, the seed comes out of the database, or it's reduced in the database, and so the next person viewing 5 minutes later isn't looking at something that's false information. And basically we mail out our seed pretty much all over the place, and we do have to have a few people calling in, of course, when it's 50 kilos or something like that, but most of it goes out through the post. Yes, I think that 1 seed bank could definitely probably service all of Tassie, although I gather it's pretty diverse landscapes there, but I mean Victoria's similar in that as well. And there are plenty of private seed banks located around Victoria that we compete with and collaborate with, so that would be quite similar too. Does that answer the question, Ruth? Is there anything else?
Yeah, no, that's really good. Thanks.
Makes sense.
I think that's what Herbert's referring to, something at the next level from a community-based seed bank. He feels needed in Tassie, so, and how to go about doing that. Do you have any volunteers, collectors, Dan, for your seed bank? Or
so we have the collectors who supply us seed that we sell on their behalf. So they're not volunteers. They're trying to, well, they're hobbyists, most of them. And but yeah, they're paid for their seed when it's sold. we do have volunteers that come in and help us from time to time with certain things. We have had programs in the past where we're that's coordinated on a strict basis, like say weekly, 1 day a week or something. The COVID times have thrown things out a little bit, and we've probably struggled to get things back on track with that since, with a few other things going on. But we've got a group at the moment coming in once a month, and we do things like seed cleaning. We hopefully in the next couple of months we'll start doing a bit more seed collecting, and that's always good because people like to get out and about, and easy to attract a few people to come and go seed collecting if they're going to, let's say, a nice bit of the bush. I know in past times I've probably spent as much time explaining what species are on the ground as the person has done in collecting. So you know, it's definitely a benefit for them. So we enjoy those sort of days. They're good. And there was another suggestion there about a good seed orchard too. What makes those? It's all in the preparation and the gathering of the original seed. So it's got to be good genetics sourced. And I'd say James is a great person to ask about that. I'm sure he's got his finger on the pulse for making a good seed orchard. But yeah, there's plenty of data out there if you dial up on CSIRO geneticists and what they've suggested we need. It's like 400 plants or something like that for a seed orchard, and how many provenances it should come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. That's really interesting. The last panelist we have is Phil. Phil, are you here? Can you wave? Phil tuned in?
I don't think he's here.
No, okay. He isn't here. Phil's going to call in from Noosa Landcare, but perhaps he's been called away to do something. So we did invite Andrew Stevenson from Wild Seed, but he had to go to the West Coast on a collecting trip, so he's not part of our panel today either. So perhaps now we will turn it over to everybody listening in. And
Ruth, can I just sorry? Yeah. One of the things I realised is I didn't actually address the questions that have been asked here in my presentation, and I don't think I quite clicked that what was required. So apologies for that. If I'll just feedback on some of those troubles with seed quality and quantity. Absolutely, yeah, we have problems all the time. My major bugbear is having my plants eaten by the time I get to them. And that's a recurring problem. Browsing is a continual sort of thorn in my side and has been for several years. Many species just have good and bad years. Eucalypts are quite sporadic with seed production, and so we're trying to do more euc collecting, but we're just waiting for the trees to actually start doing something. Acacias are a really interesting point. Like, they're incredibly patchy. One spot will be good, another spot, miles through down the road, is off. And other species, if they don't flower very well, they'll produce a lot of rubbish. So we know that things like self-incompatibility, a good example of that would be Garnia species. Garnia grandis, if I collect it in a year when there's only a few flower spikes, the seed might be about 50% full or less. And if I collect it from a population that's had a massive flowering, it's 95% full. So picking your timing of place is pretty key with that. And conifer masting, we've got an ongoing montane conifer project going on, but things like pencil pines and king billies might produce seed like every 5 to 7 years, and so you have to just wait for them to actually think about doing something. So you can't necessarily have your seeds on hand when you want them, and that really requires makes the need for long-term planning more crucial, that we can get seed in and then we can maintain the viability. And that brings us on to the future seed source problems. I'm very concerned about euc health. We can see a large number of species are starting to get more stressed and declining. If plants don't get what they require, they're not going to set seed. and so getting viable seed is going to, I think, become increasingly challenging for some species. One of the things with the masting of conifers, we know that 2 successfully hotter summers seems to be a trigger, and with climate change, we might think that we'll get more masting events. And we had a bit of a masting event a couple of years ago, but when we tried to collect, we found that a lot of the pencil pines actually seemed to be very drought stressed. So although they were getting the hotter summers, they weren't getting that water they required, and that might have been interfering with the masting event. So even though the climate conditions might be favorable for masting, if they're not getting the amount of moisture levels they require, they might not do anything anyway. So yeah, like trying to get stuff now rather than wait for later seems to be key. And in terms of achieving restoration size collections, that's really tricky. Like it's not, I'm always focused on conservation collections. Landscape restoration is a much bigger scale than what I tend to be looking at. For certain species, it's incredibly straightforward, getting hundreds of thousands of seeds, but for a lot of species, it's incredibly difficult to do that. I was speaking to colleagues at the QC Bank some years ago, and they started a program where they were trying to encourage their local wildflower industry to use British provenance seed, and so they were actually regenerating some of their collections, generating larger seed collections from some of their collections, and then passing that over to the actual commercial seed industries, which would then sow them, grow them on, and produce even greater quantities of seed for their industries. And so, it seems to me that, as Dan was saying about the seed production areas, that's something that, needs to be thought about. But one of the things we need to think about again with future planting is provenance. One of the debates and discussions we've been having with the university is, some parts of the state are dry than others. And in terms of future planting euc species from drier parts of the state might be better for future planting in the future. So planting trees that are local to your area might not be the best in terms of climate change. So where are those areas? Where are those areas that we should be collecting from? What are the better quality provenances to be selecting for in the future? And then if we do need to do seed production areas, do we need to try and identify those sooner rather than later and get those? Because eucs, of course, we can't expect to seed for maybe 8-10 years. That's a long lead in time. So there's a lot of really thorny questions in here about how to address this. Sorry to be a downer.
Wow. Yeah, it is quite complicated. It has layers and layers, James, I think, but we've got to start somewhere. So yeah. Okay, so
just make a quick comment on so provenance. That's happening with all our projects, provenance collection. We use the established forestry seed zones, which I think most of you would be familiar with. So the state has been divided up into climatic or microclimatic regions by forestry, and we use those. So that's a base to work from. And the other point, we've for at least the last 10 years have worked with using provenance with a climate change in mind for the future. So we're going for plants that are of a drier provenance and drier and cold and extreme, more extreme. So it's invariably leads us up the Fingal Valley and those sort of areas which are very, very dry. And when they do get a frost, the frost will be on top of the old established radiata pines. So cold and frosty and very dry, hot summers. Yeah, but that's all stuff to build on for the future. That'll do.
Yeah, it is. It's a good insight. Okay. We might see if anyone else is tuning in would like to ask a question, or someone from the panel, or to make a comment about our discussion today. So you can, if you unmute and maybe put your hand up, we can see you're going to said something. Otherwise, Lily might. Oh, here we go. Karen.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. I was interested, Dan, about how you go about working out what price you pay for seed and your seed collectors. How do you work that out?
Well, the long and the short of it would be the collectors think that it's worth more, and the people buying it would like to pay less.
Yes.
Although there is a few of those that realise the value of the seed and the time that goes into it. But generally speaking, you know, well, what I've just said. When I started with the seed bank, the prices had already been allocated by people who managed before me, and originally a lot of those prices were determined by seed collectors, that they had meetings and had groups of the seed collectors joining, and they worked out the value of the seed, and it was varied on the availability of the species, the methods to collect it, and how to extract it. So all of that contributes to how available the seed is and how much quantity you can get, and then a price was put around that. So we have individual prices for all the individual species. So that's not perfect. And I do know another seed bank, Goulburn Broken Seed Bank, have a pricing structure, which is a much better idea, I think, much easier to manage. And they categorise their species, and they've got a set price for each of those categories. So they can adjust the categories pricing quite easily, and then they don't have to work it out on one species at a time, which is great.
Yeah.
So I recommend contacting them and seeing how they do that if that's what you're going to use. But generally speaking, it's about the availability of the seed, that species, and the ability to be able to gain some seed from it. So yeah.
Which can change from year to year or season to season, can't it?
Yeah, well, that's part of it as well. So yeah, if it's something that's common and it's common yearly, like a blackwood or something like that, then it's the cheap. Well, it's our second cheapest. Golden wattle's the cheapest.
Yeah.
And then so, and then there's other things that only seed every 3 or 4 years, or even more, really.
What was the name of the seed bank that you just mentioned?
Goulburn Broken.
Goulburn.
Goulburn, yeah. Goulburn River.
Yeah, thanks.
No worries.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? We have some in the chat as well. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah. So is it? Yeah. Hi, Dembe. Hi, you can turn your microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
That's my question in the chat. I've joined this. I registered for this. My Landcare coordinator just shared the opportunity with all of us, and I'm just your average volunteer who rocks up on a Sunday once a month. But I have a property, and I have like a sea of blackwood seeds and eucalyptus and other things. But listening to you all talk, I just suddenly feel like, oh, I can't collect seed. It's got to be of a certain standard. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. Blah, 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 blah. So we've got this shortage. I've got a resource. How do you connect the two? I mean, what's in place for the average person who volunteers and who would be willing to contribute?
Yeah, I might have a go at answering that, because you're not alone. There's so many people out there that are super keen to collect seed, and property owners that know they've got an amazing resource and that can tell people when things are ready. So I hear that people would like to have centralised seed banks, and I do understand that, and maybe that's where we get to eventually. But In the meantime, I think the other way of looking at it is that we basically decentralize seed collecting a little bit and rely on some kind of a communication network. So this is just an idea. We have already set up a seed collecting Landcare Facebook group, and we'll email everyone the link for that, so you can join. So it might just like further the discussion along these lines, because sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You're right. Yeah, because I think we can actually, back to the provenance thing as well, the local like nurseries that we've set up, they are tending to kind of specialise. I know Nipaluna is basically specialising in Midlands trees, and the Huonville nursery is looking like it's going to be more wet sclerophyll and, you know, like rainforest species. And those people in those areas are really, really keen to collect seed in their area. So, yeah, I think we just need some kind of network communication mechanism, and that's why we want to try this Facebook page.
Thank
And
you.
also we'll continue doing our training, because there's lots to know about seed collecting. There's a few legalities as well. So there's a lot of expertise already in the community, but we'll keep continuing with the seed resilience workshop training sessions with Ruth into the future. So yeah, hope that answers your question a little bit. Don't
Yeah.
be scared.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just say something to that as well?
Yeah.
I think anyone can collect seed. I mean, we've been doing it for 20,000 years, saving some seeds so we can grow a crop next year or something like that. It's not totally rocket science or anything like that. So anyone can do it, whether you've done a good job or not. That's the next level. But there are certain guidelines, like the Flora Bank guidelines over here. They'll apply to anywhere, really. Flora Bank guidelines were set up as an idea on how to collect. So collect no more than whatever they say, 20% off any one plant. Keep moving along so you get a good genetic pool in your seed, and document what you've done so that it's not misinterpreted by someone else as the wrong thing and gets utilised in the right way. Look, if you've got an abundance of blackwood seed, be careful when you harvest it, because there's a bit of dust in it and it can make your breathing a bit upset. So wear a mask. But yeah, good luck and enjoy.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Okay. That was a good question, because that's brought up our network that we're looking at developing, and you can join our Facebook site after this discussion. Right. Any more questions now? We've got some in the chat that Lily could read out as well.
Yeah.
So
I think most of those questions have been answered, but Karen has just made a great suggestion that that Landcare groups could make one of their working bee seed collection days. I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah.
Did you want to elaborate on that more, Karen, or did you?
which Karen is it?
Karen Keats.
I'm not really, but I do a lot of seed collecting myself, but lots of people ask questions about it, and it would be a great way to train people how to do it, and so they could do it on their own land and have their own individual collections as well. And I like to grow the local provenance seed for our revegetation project. I find a lot of the plants that we get aren't suited to our climate and they don't survive.
Yep.
If I can just jump on that, one of the real recurring problems which I have for my seedround program is being in the right place at the right time. You know, capitalizing on species that are seeding really well, is the best way of getting a decent collection in. But I can't be in all parts of the state at all times, so I very rarely know what's going on other than in the areas I'm surveying in for specific target species that I'm looking at this year. I'd be more than happy if a Landcare group sees an opportunity to collect and wanted to get some collections in, and I'd be happy to join them and talk about the seed collecting practice that we use, seed handling, anything like that, is a part training exercise and a part of a way of us getting seeds into the seed bank. I'm open to that discussion if that's useful.
That's great.
Good to know, James. Are you after particular species, or do you need provenance on common things as well? So
I'm open to anything and everything. We've got the first priority is threatened species, but even common species are useful. Particularly some of the really common species are actually really difficult to germinate. So like the Ericaceae, getting decent collections of Monotocca, I'd be really pleased to get some decent collections of Monotocca species in, because we don't really have most of those lowland ones in, or in numbers or in qualities that are useful. Because in terms of resolving germination, you need a big collection to work with in the first place. There are also things like Pimelia species. Some of the very common Pimelia species, again, they can be very tricky to get decent sized collections in, and Thymelaceae are highly difficult to germinate, and so getting large collections in that we can then start looking at working out the germination behavior of those is very useful. So I'm open to literally anything, because any potential collection has value. Like, even if it's just for local restoration purposes, that's still a value, and there's research potential here. And I've got a large freezer room running 24/7, which is mostly empty space at the moment. Having additional collections in there, fine by me.
Yeah, right. That's good to know. We'll be around. Yeah, that's really great, James. I mean, the Facebook page might even be just people saying, "Oh, look, this bush here is seeding right now." Even if they're not quite sure what it is, they could upload a picture. And I mean, with threatened species, unless you've got a permit, you can't actually go out and collect them legally. But if you knew that they were seeding now at someone's property, then you would have the right permit, and that might help in that way.
Yeah, I have to get my permits renewed each year, and I'm actually in the cusp. I'm actually in the midst of doing that at the moment. So I have to get them every year. I have to get them renewed. So I can get people. I can have people covered by letter, but like I said, if it's a situation whereby I'm helping to train people up and getting collections in, I'm open to that. They're particularly on the West Coast as well. There's a number of species on the West Coast I'd like to try and collect, but just trying to get over to the West Coast is a major undertaking.
Yeah.
It's a day just to get there and a day to get back. So it's not something I can easily work into my regular program. But if there's a possibility of making connections with West Coast groups, training them up, and then getting material from sites I'm interested in the future, then again, I think it's a win-win.
Yeah. I think some of the species you're interested in, James, are hard to propagate, to germinate, like Pimelia, and also Garnia phyllum or Garnia radula as well, another one. But so it's possible that you could focus on those, but also expand. Could you expand what you're teaching people to things that are easy to propagate in the same session as well?
So in terms of germination data, we make our germination data publicly available. So obviously I'm running incubators, and I've got 12 incubators. Most people don't have 12 incubators in the back of their house. But that being said, trying to germinate seeds in the incubator is actually a little bit more tricky than getting stuff to germinate in a pan and a cold frame, because the incubators themselves are actually a bit more two-dimensional. I've sown Ericaceae in cold frames out there, and I've had successive recruitment over 13 years. Each year I get a couple of seeds to go. Whereas I can run the germination test and they don't do anything for like 4 or 5 years because they're not quite getting the right signal. What I think the value of my germination data is that you can look at what's going on, like, oh, he did a long hot spell and then a long cold spell. So if I put the seed pan in a cloche during the summer, that will keep them warm, then shove the pan into a fridge over the winter period and then bring it out in the spring, that does the same thing. So you can effectively, look at what's going on and then interpret that into your own home usage. Now, there is a bit of interpretation in there, and again, if there was enough pressure, enough interest, I'm happy to sit down and have a discussion with people and talk about that. But germination itself, it's a huge topic. It's a massive can of worms. There's things like some of the seed dormancies are plastic, and so the dormancies actually vary from year to year in certain species. So I can collect the same plant from the same population, and its germination requirements will be slightly different. There are situations whereby we know that in certain species, different seeds dispersed on different parts of the same inflorescence on that plant will have different germination requirements. So one technique will only get a certain type of seed to go, and another technique will get the other subset to go. So in certain circumstances, there may not be a technique that can get 70 or 80% of the collection to go. That just isn't how that species works. So you only get like one cohort or another to go, depending on what you do. And those are the nightmare species. Like with Gardenia grandis, I can only get about 66% germination out of my collections, and I suspect that maybe that's what's going on there.
Okay.
Karen.
So I'm just going to jump in. There was a question. I'm not exactly sure who it's from because I think your screen name is the name of your phone. But so someone has asked, they would like to know more about how to comply with collection permits and logging data into NVA. Is that something that can be discussed here, Ruth?
I think we probably need someone from NRE to answer that question, but it's something we'll take on board and try and get some answers for, I think.
So I can feed you in from my own experience. So I require 3 permits. I require a threatened species permit to collect in reserves and parks. I then need a Crown land permit to collect on Crown land, and I then also need a forest permit to collect in state forest. So what I tend to do is I tend to get my threatened species permit sorted out first. I get that renewed each year. I have to surrender my data onto the NVA, and I'm using, if you go to the NVA, you can download a spreadsheet that allows you to enter data in there. It's all done using Eastings and Northings in the GDA format. If you register with the NVA, you can download the spreadsheet and look at that to see how that spreadsheet works. And then you just send it back to the NVA and they'll import it in for you. But yeah, like in terms of actually getting your permit to begin with, that's you need to talk to NRE about that and get that sorted. I've had some volunteers who actually tried to get an independent permit just recently, and they got turned down. They were hoping to work a little bit more independently from me, but still work for me. But that's not being allowed. So they need to work underneath my permit with a letter of authority from me to allow them to work. So there can be some hurdles here. Like with my work's a bit difficult because I could be working. I'm traveling all over a large part of the state and collecting anything that's actually collectible. Whereas most permit requirements ask you to be very specific as to what it is you're going to collect, where you're going to collect it. And that's two questions that I have a vague idea about, but not much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually talked to someone in NRE, and basically you definitely need a permit with any threatened species. And then you have to ask the permission of the landowner or land manager. If it's private land, it becomes quite easy. That can just be a verbal, yes, you can collect species here as long as it's not threatened species. But then otherwise, if you're in a national park, state reserve, nature reserve, or nature recreation area, you can't collect anything because it's an extraction of resources. So it does depend on the land tenure. And it also, the other complication is if there's a covenant over the land, then the covenant might say that you're not allowed to collect species, or you are. So yeah, there's kind of three things: if it's threatened, the land tenure, and then the covenant aspect.
Okay, thank you. One more question, Lily.
Yeah, so there's one more question from the chat box, and it says from Wayne, like, that it sounds like we already have a seed bank established at the Botanical Gardens. I think it's a little bit different what we're trying to aim to do. So I don't know if Anna or Ruth wanted to elaborate on that a bit.
I think, or James
Or
could,
James,
but
yeah.
James is collecting for conservation purposes, where the seed isn't there to be grown for re-veg sites or for nurseries. So it is a seed bank more than a seed shop, and we're looking at setting up more of a seed shop where we can trade in seeds.
Yeah.
Or swap.
Yeah.
So, like, again, I'm amenable to a conversation about this because we do have quite a lot of storage space going spare. But there is a management issue with that, so we need to know what was in there, and that's not necessarily something that I can take over lightly. So we'd need to flesh out the details. But I'll be very honest. There are plenty of very low-tech ways of doing this successfully. One of the issues that people have is seed handling. If it's not done very well, seed collections can lose viability fairly quickly. I was interested, Ruth, you mentioned about Berseria losing its viability fairly quickly, but I've got a collection here that I was getting 95% germination 2 years after collecting. So, so I think getting seeds dried down and then putting it into suitable storage conditions is key with this. There are programs around the world which are using silica gel, plastic drums, and storing in Coca-Cola bottles and sticking in a domestic freezer. I've got it all. I've got a lovely fancy drying room and a freezer room, which is all very nice. But you can do quite a lot with very little. That was part of the remit around the Millennium Seed Bank, is that as long as you had your practice down correctly, you can actually get seeds to maintain the viability for pretty good periods of time. Wow. It's just a matter of getting your system straight, your protocols correct, and you can be golden. So
your Berseria, what temperature was it stored at, James?
So our collections are stored at -20. So that's that's a domestic freezer unit. So they were just collected up, put in the drying room. So our drying room is running at 15% relative humidity, 15 degrees centigrade. That's an industry standard. There's a little bit of flexibility with that. You don't need to get that perfectly correct. But we dried them down, we cleaned them up, sealed them up. We collected it in 2010, I think in March of 2010, and we tested in February of 2012, and we gained 95% germination out of it. So, it's interesting. I've heard stories about these daisies are very short-lived. I mean, I've never had problems with daisies. They seem to store very easily. But yeah, we know there are certain things like one of the things that's come out of orchid research is that they now know that orchids do lose viability very, very quickly. And so it's the actual standard now is to try and get your orchid seed processed and banked within 10 days of collecting.
Okay.
So that's a really fast timeline.
Yeah.
Other species more. So things like eucalypts and acacia seem to be extremely robust and very forgiving. Yeah, you can get plants in the extreme where you basically have to try and get them cleaned up, dried down, and stored prompto to get them to store for any period of time.
That's good tip there, a good hack. Thanks for all of us. Yeah. So how are we going? I think we're getting close to time.
Just one other thing, there is a QR code and we'll send you the link to do the survey. So we're trying to gather some data there and this will go wider than just the people here. So yeah, we'll go wide and we'll see who's collecting, what are they collecting for, are they interested, do they feel trained, and so on. Nell, you've got your hand up there, mate. I think you have to unmute.
Sorry.
Hi.
I've got 2 questions up on the chat that haven't been addressed.
Sorry.
One of them was to ask about guidelines for setting up an arboretum. There's in the Midlands, there's not an arboretum, a seed bank, a seed orchard. And in the Midlands, there's Greening Australia has established a sort of random arboretum. And because we have issues around collecting seed in the Midlands, that sort of seems to be one, long-term goal. But I was keen to ask one of the first speakers from Victoria about
Dan.
Any thoughts about that, and any ideas? And my other question was, does anyone use the ARC GIS to record locations and things? Because I think it's really useful to know where particular plants are that we can go back to and look at when is the best time to harvest and where. So those 2 questions.
Okay. Dan, perhaps you could answer those, could you?
I'll start with the second one. With our database, there's records of all the seed that's gone through, and when you're looking for a species, you don't know where to find it, you can check out the database. If those records are accurate, then there's something really valuable there to utilise. Unfortunately, some of the collectors, it's intellectual property and where they have found seed, and it's not always highly accurate on where the location is. So it might mention a road, or it might mention a locality rather than a town, but that might be as close as you get. So yes, if you can get people to use a GIS system and pinpoint where things are, that's fantastic. And I mean, there'll be a PhD student sometime in the future that wants to use that information. So that'll be good. The other part relating to the Midlands, I'm not sure if I gathered what the question was.
It was about guidelines around setting up seed collection areas or seed orchards. Are there any guidelines?
Yeah, there are. I know CSIRO seed geneticists have some pilot controls and ideas on that. And look, we were given a figure of 500 plants for a seed orchard, but I mean, it's a little bit subjective, because 500 eucalypts compared to 500 orchids is a fair bit difference in size, and not that I'm working with orchids, but comparatively speaking.
So Dan, that's 500 of the same species you're talking about. 500
of the same species, yeah,
right.
It was mentioned in there.
Okay.
So, and that will come from a number of different provenances. And each of your provenances that you select should be relatively larger populations with a good genetic base. The idea is that you're not selecting material that could be isolated and somewhat inbred and putting that into your seed orchards. And there's a heap of literature written on it, but I gather from some people the modern thing is now doing climate matching, which again, you can go on CSIRO website and find out what the climate will be like where you are in 20 years or 50 years or 90 years and whereabouts in the world that climate is now that will match what yours will be in that 50 years time or whatever. You could select seed from that location, but it may not exist. It could be up on the mainland or you know, the species might not exist where that climate matching is, if you know what I mean.
Right, endemic species.
So and with the climate matching and the climate adjusted seed orchards, most of them are using a large majority of the provenances to be localized or at least regionally based, and then a small percentage to be further afield, and then some of that generally is that climate matching area. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but I hope it makes some sense.
Thank you.
To add further to that, I haven't used any climate matching. We've gone with regionally based seed orchards to pool some genetics, basically, and create a seed supply that is useful in our region.
Yeah, I've had a look at that climate adjusted provenance, and I think we are going to be Ballarat in 50 years or something.
Yes, and there might be some species that you can use that occur here, but then there'll be species that you've got that don't occur here, and so you can't do that climate matching.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate around shifting plants around on the landscape, and you know, hopefully they've got a lot more tolerance than we think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Dan. So I think that's about it. I think we'll wrap it up soon. And if we've got everybody's emails that Lily has in the chat, we can send you some follow-up from this today and send you the link to the survey as well. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope you all got something out of being on our Zoom today.
Yep. Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.
Cheers, folks.